first we're going to do introductions, and I know that the pictures don't show the same on everybody's screen probably, but since I'm moderating, I win. And Pushpinder, you get to introduce yourself first.
Sure. So my name is Pushpinder, and I work for Northbridge Financial Corporation as a senior automation manager here. I oversee and manage the COE team here, wherein we work on various different automation techniques like Selenium with C#, API testing using Parasoft, virtualization using Parasoft, and many more. That's a little bit about myself. Thank you.
Thanks. ASTQ, you show up next in mine, so.
So yeah, I'm from the Enterprise Architecture and Engineering organization of Bank of America. And I've been with the bank for 20 years. And I used to manage automation for 7 organizations before. And before I was asked to come to the enterprise division to lead the CI/CD and agile part from the testing side for processes, tools, and everything else across the bank.
Great, great. Thank you. And Michael?
Hi, Michael Stone. I work for CIBC. I'm a director of QA. I've been in the QA side of things probably for about 8 years now. Been in the industry for about 30. And again, the things that I've been focused on past years is testing on the API, automation, performance testing has been the main focus, and how our bank or how our division also has been working to fill those gaps where we need the automation, and looking also and using the virtualization environments. So
great, great. So you know, we just saw at the tail of Hirakan's presentation some of the metrics he was using for you know, determining where they wanted to go and what they wanted to do. And I'm a huge fan of the idea that we have a goal, that we have something we can measure, and we do measure it and we move toward it. So Pushpinder, maybe you can start, like, tell me, what's your test automation goal and how do you measure it?
So we have been focusing on 100% regression automation for now. And this year, our goal had been to, include more of an sprint test automation. So our goal was to start and, get up to, eventual goal is up to get to 100% in sprint automation of the ones that are automatable. So I have to just want to be clear here. Not like everything that's written, we plan to automate. Something, whatever can be automated gives you ROI. That's like 100% we want to achieve ours. And in order to get that, we have created our framework in a way that we can include more of functional testers, including into automation. So it's not just the automation team that's writing automation now, but the framework is enhanced in a way that functional testers can contribute to that. And whatever they write, it gets automated behind the scenes. And that's how we are achieving our goal, getting towards that goal of 100% in sprint automatable automation.
Yeah, so very, very well defined so that it's achievable and measurable.
Yeah.
ASTQ, do you want to tell us about your goals and measures?
Yeah, so the goal that I was given when I came to this division was to ensure that we can do in-sprint automation, not just in-sprint, but whenever code is deployed, our automation scripts will kick off automatically. And they will kick off in parallel in different machines to reduce the time of execution, so that whether it is smoke testing, we call also basic testing and regression. The way we define basic is new functionality as well as core impacts to regression. So we have those 3 test types that we have in our CI/CD platform for testing, and we run those automatically for the smoke and for basic and regression as soon as the code is deployed to any environment. So if it's environment to dev environment, to QA environment, whichever environment, we will run those tests automatically. And we have, we have our own in-house CI/CD platform as well. And so we have integrated with that, and we have integrated to different tools as well as to different automation frameworks in the bank. So we kind of enabled the entire bank to be able to execute with each deployment automatically. And that was our goal.
All right. Michael, how about you? What are you guys shooting for?
Well, like everybody, you want that 100%, but that's just not possible in certain protocols, right? So the approach that we looked at is we looked at all the different types of testing we do, from web-based to desktop to API, everything, right? And then we had to look at the number of manual tests we had, and of course there's going to be a lot of potential in certain areas, and we determined which ones we could automate. And then we put a plan together to say, okay, this is going to take us 2 years to do because the volume is so high. And we made that plan. But we also had to look at, for desktop, what is the right tool? What is the right framework to use? And we did that. And we decided as a committee, under the QA committee, that for web-based, we're going to use this framework. For API, and we decided that we would use the SOA test and the API tools for that. And we had different tools for everything. And then we would set our targets for each year, right? So over 2-3 years, this is what we're going to do, and we hit our measures, right? So at the end of the first year, we say we're going to be 50%. We made sure that we hit that 50%. Now, the ones that we couldn't automate, that's where we have to look at and say, we don't have the technology or the tool today to do it. We have to find a way. So we would look at if we would have to build our own engines within inside our organization to do the work, or go out there, and sometimes we had to go look with outside agencies like Deloitte or other ones to say, what is the best tool out there in the market? Let us know and see what fits with us. And that's what we did. So that's the approach we did. And where we had those manual, we would say, we're going to hit these at this time with this tool. And then we did that. So that was the way we did it.
All right. So we've got some questions coming in, and they're pretty fascinating. And I think and for this part, like whoever wants to chime in, right? Like we won't take it in order, but you've almost all talked about in-sprint automation. So they're asking, can you share your definition of in-sprint automation?
So my definition, go ahead.
I can say on that. So in-sprint automation, basically, we focus on automating the components that are being worked on, or the functionality that is being worked on in that particular sprint, right? The focus first is to automate those components, reusable components, and then as many test cases as you can, like as many scenarios, if they're data-driven or if they are the individual test cases, that basically whatever is being done in that sprint, and it could be that you are doing your QA n-1. If you are actually doing your QA n-1, then your automation is also that n-1. That's your in-sprint then, right? Ideally, according to Agile, I would say the sprint that you are actually developing, you are testing, and you are automating. That's kind of the core definition, I would say, for in-sprint.
Yeah, and from my perspective, the way we do in sprint is we size the stories. When we size the stories, we also build in the testing estimates into that. So we want to ensure that we are finishing development and testing of whatever we have put in that story within that sprint of stories. So when we build the automation suite or take an existing automation suite, edit it, whatever, we tie it to the exact changes that are happening. So we use a source code repository where the branch is created over there, and then we will tie what we call in our test harness component is basically the repo in that source code repository. So we tie it to that, and exactly whatever changes are happening are the scripts for those will be running within that sprint.
And for us, pretty well, very similar to the others speaking. It's the stories, the requirements, and we go from there. The development team is building the branches, but we made a little adjustment. Is we would wait for the code in sprint. So we would say the sprint's maybe 4 weeks, and development might get 2 weeks of it, and then QA would get 2 weeks of it. We want to be faster to market. So what we're slowly adjusting now is we're moving the QA right under or parallel with development. So when they're developing the code, we're in the same sessions they are, we're developing our tests. And then we're starting to leverage our virtual environment that when the developer is ready to test their piece of code, they can go into the virtual environment and use the tests that would be used in our feature testing. The developer gets to use their unit test, and then they get to use, for example, the API test, validate if the code is good. If it's not, they take it back, then they put it back in, you're using the virtual environment. If it's good, then they can move to the next steps.
Yeah, just to add to that, I just want to add that, different teams have different maturity. So there are some teams that will have, they know how to do BDD, for example. They will have feature files that they will execute right off the bat, even before code is written. And then there's some teams who are not that advanced.
Correct.
So we kind of
right.
adjust accordingly.
Yeah. And then that's exactly not our entire organization. We're not all doing that. There's certain groups that are more mature than others. That's fine, right? You're still doing testing, getting it done, but in some areas we're able to just move that a little bit to the left and do it earlier to improve the sprint time.
All right, so Herikant actually put a question in for you, right? And I think he took the same response I did when I first heard your goals weeks ago as we were chatting. He's asking, do you automate all tests? And I believe that the answer from all of you has been consistently like 100% of what's automatable, and you need to be careful about what you're throwing into that it's not automatable bucket, because it's easy to go, I don't want to stop and figure this out, but you also need to be careful not to throw too many things into the let's automate it bucket and waste your time on something that could be done manually. So, drawing a balance there is super important. I don't know if anybody had anything else to add to that topic.
No, that's very important, right? Is like, as soon as you say automate, I can automate this, the first response for management can be is, okay, that's 100%, right? No, I have buckets. I have groupings that I can automate this. This one I maybe can't, and this one I can't. And you have to very clearly explain that to the people you're speaking to.
And in our case, we automate and we measure that at the story level. So when we say story 1 is 80% automatable and all 80% is automated, that story is looking good. If story 2 cannot be automated at all, then that's fine if it's 0. But we don't want to have 100. We don't want people to create automation tests just for the for the purpose of creating automation tests. Otherwise, you end up with hundreds of thousands of automation tests.
Yeah, and we have to see it's manageable, maintainable as well. There is always a maintenance cost to whatever you are automating, right? Not just the development cost. So ROI and technological challenges, I think they all come into consideration when you decide what to automate. That's a topic in itself. Like we have created our guide for our organization, what to automate, how to decide what to automate. So I think it's a very important and careful consideration that you have to decide before you start automating everything.
Yes, and just one thing to add there is you have to be careful. You just don't continue to automate because your portfolio is going to grow so much that the maintenance is going to be so much. You have to have a process in there where you're doing your checks and balances to optimize. You got stuff coming in that the new stuff can replace some of the old stuff. If you don't have that process in place, you're going to have 10,000 and 30,000 at the end of the year. That 30,000 to maintain, you're going to have to add bodies, right? Because things are going to break. So yeah.
And I want to add one more thing. I think there comes a very important responsibility of us as QA leaders in order to manage expectations. Because when we are brought into automation, our senior leaderships or, they might expect us to, when we say 100% automation, that, okay, 100% automation, get rid of manual testers and all. So we have to manage those expectations very clearly. What does 100% automation mean? And it's a very delicate topic that has to be, taken care of by the leaders very responsibly.
And I think that leads us perfectly into, I've got 3 or 4 questions here that are all flavors of the same question, and it is bringing those manual testers along into the automation. Like, how do you train them? Who do you train? how do you reduce the amount of manual in an intelligent way, like just variations on the migration from manual to automation. So maybe ASTQ, you want to start this one?
Yeah, so we took as a two-pronged approach. What we did was we arranged for training, in-house training, where instructor-led training for people for the tool of choice. So we would explain what the tools were, and then we would train them on those. And the second thing was we also have at least one tool that you can automate without the need of scripting. So what that allows you to do is those teams that, they always wanted to keep their manual testers, they can always use that tool to automate without scripting. And that way they're able to automate because, the tool creates the things without them having to actually script. So we have a few teams that are using that tool that are meant for scriptless automation. And then the other people who have a real automation teams, like real, what I mean is they know how to script and all that. We have, the regular tools that everyone uses, Selenium, UFT, all those things, ENFT. Those are always available for them. But and in that way, actually, our manual footprint has gone down a lot because even what used to be manual testers, they're either all automation testers or they're using that particular tool to automate their scripts.
Michael, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? When you're reducing your manual test, everyone can get a little worried. What's going to happen with me? We took the approach that we started off at the beginning of our journey. We had skilled people with the automation skills. Then we moved to the next piece where we started training our QA people. And we've evolved over time where now the QA people who actually would create the scripts and they're creating them, they're doing the automation, and they're executing. So reducing the manual is more of a passion for them to do and say, I can take these, I can optimize these, I don't need these anymore because this is a replacement, or I can automate these now, these ones have been sitting here, I can do this. So the QA person is not just a person that came in and tested anymore. It's a person that's actually using the tools. We train them, and they're doing the automation. They're creating the scripts, and they're executing.
Yeah, mainly the knowledge the manual testers had. There are teams that don't want to lose that. So
that's right.
Using the scriptless tools.
Yeah. Anybody? Anything else on that?
I can add what we are doing there. So we have kind of divided our team into various different pods, where we say our automation team consists of core automation developers, where they are going to work on the core keyword components, actual scripting, like actually creating the stage methods or the components, I would say, the major functionality. And then we have manual testers who can create the scripts, right? Like with directly just calling those components, as as Yak said, that they are involved more into script creation part. In order to enhance them, to make them more automation-enabled functional testers, we had created our Excel interface on our existing Selenium framework, and manual testers can just go into those Excels and call those keywords without even having to go into any kind of code or even editor. So that has helped a lot of our functional testers to be a part of the automation. Plus, we had seen the automation teams were spending a lot of time on test data creation for their testing, where functional teams have the knowledge, they have that expertise, and we can, utilize their contribution into automation. So we are including them into more of test data creation for automation as well, like test data creation as in data creation for the script. So then they are involved into automation, and then they are basically, because when they are doing their functional testing, they know what data they need to use for their functional testing. So they are the ones who are creating test data and putting their components into the scripts and now executing them as well. So three things, right? Test data creation, putting into Excel, and then execution part. So that's how they are involved, and they are kind of, reducing that manual effort.
Pushpin that touched on test data, that one we used to find that, manual testers spend up to 40% of their time creating data. So we actually built a couple of tools in-house to massage the data. We also bought a tool to virtualize the data. So you can virtualize the data within seconds and then massage the data if you want to fit your, test conditions, and then run your test. So we kind of gave them all the abilities to do that, whichever way they want to. But we also have a framework that you can, for Selenium, where you can use Excel and have your tests.
Right.
But the test data automation was a very, very key part of automating the rest of the tests.
Yeah. And we want to use their functional expertise in more of exploratory, more of functional business scenarios that automation cannot do, right? So
and service
we can never
virtualization. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying we can never get rid of that, that human intelligence that's needed to test the actual business flows. So they are needed, and that's what they should do actually. More of business flows and more of ad hoc exploratory testing.
And for services testing, we always encourage service, virtualization. So you shouldn't have to have a database with creating things if you have service virtualization to start with. At the end, when you're doing regression, you want a real database, but for your unit tests and whatever you're doing in the beginning, service virtualization works great. Even our performance testing teams use service virtualization very heavily.
Yeah. So as a follow-on to that, we have again like 3 different questions that all kind of roll into the same question, which is the first one was, do you still have manual testers? The second one was, what's the ratio of manual testers to automation engineers? And the third one was, what's the ratio of testers to developers? So Michael, you've been quiet for a while. I'm gonna let you go first, talk about any of those answers that are relevant to you.
I can't say what the ratio is, but I will tell you, we still have manual testing, right? There's certain things that we just don't have the tool capability to do it. There's certain things like content, accessibility. Those are things that we have to go in and validate. We have tools that can do a certain amount of automation, but not complete. So it's hard to say. Are people who were just pure manual? They're doing both. They're doing the automation and they're doing the manual. So that ratio thing is hard to say. I will say that, for example, in one of the areas that I had, API, we had like 15,000 automated tests, and we moved everything. And with the virtualization, we had 3,000 manual tests because they're data dependent. Stuff like fraud, like report your card lost or stolen. Once you use that in the test, it's no good anymore. You have to wait and get it reset with the back ends and the logical. We've done it in the virtual where we can automatically reset it so we can test and test and test. So we've taken that, we moved it. So the people are now more building the virtual assets. When new stuff comes in, they're developing the automation test, they're doing all that. So if I wanted to take the number, I would say that I used to be, a year ago, 50% was, 50% of the people were doing manual in a group of maybe 20 people, and the other ones were doing the asset building and all the other stuff. Now it's probably, maybe five people, 6 people that are doing the manual, right, in our release testing, because we have so much automation. They're there because remember, once tests fail, and you want them to fail to find anything broken. So once it fails, you have to then go through your defect management process, get the piece fixed, and you have to retest it. So you need that person to do that piece of work. The analyzing of the failed test, working with development, retesting, certifying it. So you're never going to have one person manual. You still need that layer there. I hope that answers.
Kind of the same situation for us, because we used to have a lot of manual testers, and now they're hardly there in the bank. In fact, if you go and look at our requisitions, you will probably not find a single requisition for a manual tester. But all of our automation testers also do some amount of manual testing when needed, right? So there is no but everyone does automation testing. There is no one dedicated to doing manual testing right now. So we are all automation.
The roles are clubbing basically. Yeah. as everyone is saying. The manual testers are needed for more of analysis, as Michael mentioned, more of exploratory stuff, where automation cannot think of, right? Or you can only automate a particular straight flow, but when it needs to thinking part, when it comes to thinking part, then we need those functional testers. But again, they are not 100% functional testers. They are also contributing to automation.
Yeah, and in my team, there is one developer, two testers ratio, but other teams may have 1 to 3 ratio. But if it's a regulatory product, project, you will not be surprised if it's 1 to 1 ratio. So it kind of depends on.
Yeah, it's varying.
Okay, and there was a follow-up, and I think this is something that you said, Michael, right? It might have been ASTQ as well, but they're saying, what processes has your team put in place to help automation engineers write code in parallel with developers writing writing their tests in parallel with the developers writing the code?
Okay, yeah. So I work with very closely with my dev partner, the director, and we came up with a model that we called 0.0. Okay, 0.0 is taking, because basically development was here, and they would code, and then we would come here and then we would test. And the problem is when they finish their code, they got to move on to the next sprints. But if we found defects, we had to pull them back. So it always put pressure on the timelines. So we came up with a model called 0.0, where we brought the API team right along with development. They go to the requirements meeting, they go to the design meetings. When they're reviewing the tests, it's a partnership, is 0-0. That was the big win. So then, but development was very close with QA. You have to have that relationship and partnership agreement to make this thing work, because if you don't, you're going to slip, right? So we've ingested all the QA people onto the different development teams. They sit together, they talk together, everything together. That is how we made our success go through that model of doing that, right? And building the virtual environment is key to them, because they can do early testing. Like, we used to get the code when it came out of DIT or development after they did the unit testing. Why don't we just throw it into the actual environment that we built? So we have an asset team that builds the assets in the virtual environment, along with the code being developed and the test being developed. So when they're ready, they go out, they test. So it was a change, and it's not with the entire organization within our bank. It's just this one group that we thought this was the right way to do it, and it's working.
I think it's important to have those collaborations between developers and QAs throughout the process, throughout when the requirements come, the user stories come, and start discussing, start thinking what scenarios and what to automate. And again, it's doable. We are doing that as well in some of our groups. It's very much doable. If again, the process needs to be there.
Yeah, and the important thing is there's a cost savings there, because when you have developers who move on to the next sprint or the next project, and you got to pull them back in to fix pieces of code that are broken, that other project that they're on is now impacted. You're impacting all the time, and there's unwanted work that shouldn't be there. You have everyone working together, QA finishes, dev finishes, they both move on to the next. It's done, it's sitting, ready to be released in production.
And in our case, what we do is, right from the acceptance criteria, has to be very clear to both sets of, people how it is supposed to work. And then, what they do is, when the developers are building their code and, writing the code and building it, and, as soon as they deploy it to our dev environment, the testers can go ahead and start testing. But they don't necessarily have to log defects for everything they find in the dev environment. Depending on teams, some teams will log, some teams will not. And then when you go to our QA environment, they'll definitely be logging defects.
Yeah.
And that's when the testers have more authority. And when you go to the integrated environment, it's more like our production environment, replica of that. Then they're actually testing the whole regression at that point. So, so they start right at the beginning. As soon as the code is deployed at the dev, they are engaged. Even if it is one thing that is deployed there, they will start testing it.
That's great. So I thank you all. We're out of time for this session. It's been fantastic. We have a ton more questions, but we need to move on to the next thing. But I will try for anybody who can stay to the end. The next session is our final session, and after that, we're going to have an open QA. So if anybody wants to stay and jump back on, and that goes for any panelists, we can answer the other remaining questions. Otherwise, we'll try and do it through email with people later. But thanks so much. It's been fascinating. You're all doing really interesting things, and it's just fun to see. And we're glad you could participate with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.